תמר? או, עוד פעם. לא. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? את יכולה לשמוע אותי?
עכשיו אני שומעת.
ועכשיו אני...
לא ידעתי על מה ללחוץ פעם.
אין בעיה, I hear you now too. שלום, מה נשמע?
בסדר, מה שלומך?
הכל בסדר, תודה.
כן, אתם מסתדרים יפה?
מה? מה יפה?
אתם מסתדרים יפה?
Oh, we're all like ordered and everything like that? חושב שכן.
אוקיי. אני צריכה לתת לך כסף בשביל הזרוע שנתת לי. אני אשאיר את זה...
מתנה, אין בעיה, מתנה.
זה יהיה בסדר.
Yofi. I actually went to Mequon, the Metro Market, yesterday, and they, for the first time, I think he had Zroot or Zorian, whatever it is.
Oh, Zroot. היה שם,
But it saved you a trip. You have one. It's good.
I was there last week, but I didn't get. Okay, that's okay. I'll find what I need.
Okay, Yofi. I mean, some things he's okay, like the frozen section, they're okay. Cheese, dairy, they're more or less okay.
The dairy was not very good when I was there. It was only Halav Israel, which was terribly expensive.
Yeah. Well, generally for Pesach cheese, it usually is only Halav Israel. Oh, Jasmine's here.
Oh, Yofi. From Alaska?
Yeah, well, I think they're in Minnesota, and I imagine she's with Jonathan. It says connecting to audio. That's wonderful. We'll start in a minute because I'm going to live stream on Facebook as well, so I want to make sure.
I will be probably leaving you in half an hour.
And I mean, it depends on how many questions we get. It may only take Chatzi sha'a. Jasmine is muted. I'll unmute her. Oh.
Okay.
Hello, Jasmine.
Hello.
Jonathan's in the background. He's listening.
Oh, sure he is. He's playing on his Game Boy, isn't he?
Probably.
Lucky if he has one. What does your shirt say? It's a beautiful day to save. Oh, was that for donating blood?
That's from Grey's Anatomy.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah,
did that show save any lives?
Imaginary lives, I guess.
Those are the best. We'll start again in just a minute. But before we start, Jasmine and/or Jonathan. Hi, Jonathan. Do you guys have any questions you want me to answer during the class?
You have any questions?
You can ask questions as we're going along, but ones that you can think of now that I can kind of like make a note to try and get to.
I don't.
It's possible that some of the things I'll talk about might be helpful. All right. I think let's go ahead and begin. I'm just gonna, like I said, I'm gonna live stream it on Facebook, which I've never done before. And as soon as it starts, then I will formally begin. I think it's doing it. Okay, Yofi. All right.
It's coming down.
All right. So shalom and welcome everyone. As people join, we'll say shalom to them when they come in. So I'm excited about tonight. It's a Pesach Q&A. So I only have a small handful of questions. Some of them I got specifically from people before the class. Some of them came up over the last few weeks from people not for the class. They just texted me and said, Rabbi, what do I do about this? And I thought they were great practical questions that are relevant to the immediate questions, Lavriut, and also to more general understanding of Pesach. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through each of these questions, share the answer I have on it, and then after each answer, anyone who has any follow-up questions, and then at the end of going through the questions, if people can think of any other general questions, I'll do my best to answer them. And because we are live and on Facebook, and also for those who are not on Facebook, if there's anything I don't know the answer to, I'll post it. And if there's any mistakes I make, I will also correct myself, because that's the most important part of teaching Torah, recognizing when you don't know something. But hopefully I'll know everything. That'll be much more helpful if I do know everything. So the first place we're going to ask, actually, Tamar, this was your question, a very practical, great one, which, it's one moment, someone else joining the class, wonderful. The question of how does one kosher, I think you had said a glass stovetop, but the truth is that it's a pretty similar answer for koshering any kind of stove, whether it's a regular fire stove, an electric glass stove, or ceramic. There's actually a resource that I'm going to share. There's a rabbi in Israel, Rabbi Eliezer Melamed, credible rabbi. He's a Rosh Yeshiva. He also writes this series called Hanine Halacha. And it's kind of a practical series where he covers almost all areas of halacha. But what he does is he explains the history behind any particular ruling, what are the different opinions, both the strict ones, if there are any leniencies, and then what he suggests in practice. So he wrote an entire book on Pesach, and he has a whole section just on koshering the kitchen. But the fundamental principle with koshering anything is that the way that it would have gotten treifed up, for example, a pot, if you have just the standard pot, doesn't matter dairy for anything like that, and a person accidentally boils pork in it, the way to get the pork out of it, it got in through boiling hot water. So the way to get it out is
Hot water.
is boiling hot water without pork in it, just plain water. So there are certain items that, and we won't get into too much here about like kashrut and koshering, where it's understood that once taste, like treif taste, the essence of treif has been absorbed into the actual pot, pan, whatever it is like that, there's no way to get it out other than, I guess, melting it down to its, constituents and rebuilding it, which they talk about in the Talmud. But most things, it's pretty easy, like metal pots, always buy metal. And for stovetops, the way that they would get treifed up is through being hot for more than 10 seconds, but being hot for a little while. So the way to kosher a stovetop, there's two parts. One is this: if I treif up a pot by cooking pork in it, and then I leave the pork in there and then boil it again, it's not going to help. It's going to keep treifing it up. So I have to clean out the pork. So too with stovetops, I need to clean it out. And the question Mario asks, is soap and water fine? And it is. Not only because it's just a great way to clean it, but an actual piece of, I'm using bacon because it's like the thing that everyone thinks about as like really unkosher stuff, is a piece of edible bacon can make something treif. But a piece of, like a tiny piece of bacon that's 300 years old, to the point where it's not defined as food anymore, it's almost no different than an eraser of a pencil falling in my pot. I know that sounds ridiculous, but a pencil eraser is not food. It might be nasty and I wouldn't want to eat it, but it can't make something unkosher because it's not food. It's a piece of paper falls into my stew. Doesn't do anything. It just adds fiber. So too, by using soap when you're washing dishes and dishwashers, cleaning the house for Pesach, any food it comes into contact with will make it not food anymore, because it'll be, whether it's poisonous, toxic, it just makes it disgusting. So not only is soap and water good enough for cleaning a stovetop or anything, it's essential because it turns any residue, any little bit of residue, into not food anymore. It makes it pagum, disgusting. So once you've cleaned off your surface as best you can, and it's important that I say as best you can, because if there's some like little thing that even with like a chainsaw you couldn't scrape away it, but it's like so caked on, you can't scrape it away, and you've soaked it and everything like that, then the fire will, or the heat will do short work of it. So once you've got it as clean as humanly possible, then you turn on the stove, whatever, ceramic, glass, or fire one. Fire is obviously better with the grates on, and you let it run for a half an hour at its highest setting. The half an hour is not arbitrary, but some people will say 45 minutes, some say an hour. The idea is this: when you're cooking something, how long does it take to really cook something? And here you want to like overcook it. You want to like burn it off essentially. So a half an hour is like, that's enough that you'd be able to cook most things. So that half hour is enough to get the treif taste and burn it out of it.
Okay.
That's the answer for the first question about how to kosher stovetops. And by the way, that applies to almost all koshering with certain exceptions. So any questions on that first answer?
No.
Got it.
Okay, great. All right, so the second question, it's more of a general one, and kind of people ask it every single year, and that's about kitniot. So kitniot, it's a Hebrew word, often translated something like legumes, which also needs a translation, even though it's an English word. But I'll give you kind of a short summary of it, just so you know what's the deal with not having beans and hummus and things like that. That's not chametz. So part of the problem with answering this question is we don't actually know why Ashkenazi, Eastern European, like Russian, Polish, etc., German Jews started saying that kitniot is not okay on Pesach. The earliest source we have, actually, I'll take a step back. If you go back to the 12th century, as of the 12th century, when Rambam was writing his Mishnah Torah, and he talked about what is forbidden to eat on Pesach, he lists chametz, and he lists all of the different species of wheat. So wheat, rye, barley, oats, and spelt. But then he explicitly says that kitniot, and he gives example, rice, millet, beans, lentils, and the likes, don't become chametz. So therefore, there's no issue with it. So the question is, in the 12th century, were people already asking about kitniot and making a problem? Or he just knew that these are things that people use to make bread, and he said, and if you even had an idea that it was a problem, it's not. But he does not mention that it is an issue. However, by the 13th century, so we're not talking hundreds and hundreds of years later, we're talking, maybe less than a century later, the Arba Turim, the grandson of the Rosh Ben Asher, and his work, he says it very interesting. He said, "V'yesh osrin," there are those who forbid the eating of rice and all other types of kitniot in a cooked dish, and he gives a reason, because this is the reason others outlaw it. Wheat might have become mixed in with them. And he says it is a chumra yeter, it's an excessive stringency, and it is not the customary practice. So by the time of the 13th century, there were people that were saying kitniot was not okay, and the Torah, which is one of the foundational early texts compiling Jewish law, like kind of Mishnah Torah, Torah, and then really the Shulchan Aruch that we have pretty much until today, he says some people say it's not okay, but really there's no problem with it. And he brings one issue, which is that people think that if you've been to like the market in Israel, like in Yerushalayim, Machane Yehuda, or any market in the Middle East, and you go to the spice store, they have these giant burlap bags. And in them, you can just take a scoop and get all of your rice and put it in your bag. You can get all of your wheat. You can get whatever it is like that. And because they have, rice bag next to wheat bag, next to barley bag, the chance of them getting mixed together is a legitimate concern. But he said, we don't need to be that strict. And in fact, Sephardic Jews today eat rice and all of kitniot. Why? Because if you have a bag of rice and you're worried about wheat getting in there, what do? You check. You check it. In fact, there are people today who check their rice bags anyways to make sure there are no bugs mixed in there. So he says it's ridiculous. You don't need to do it. But he did not. His common sense did not win out in the end. It became the common custom of Ashkenazi Jews to not eat kitniot, and there are a couple reasons given. So one is an issue of crop rotation, which is that fields of wheat would be next to rice or other forms of kitniot, and there might have been cross-contamination where kitniot crops would have been mixed into wheat, And even though someone said, well, I'll just go to my field of kitniot, which is fine on Pesach, Torah says nothing about it, doesn't become chametz, there's no leavening, but some wheat will accidentally get mixed in. Although Rav Moshe later in the 20th century rejects that and says if that's a concern about anything that might get mixed together, then anything that we make flour of, anything we grow in the field should be forbidden, including potatoes. And clearly potatoes were fine. One response to Rav Moshe might be that when they made that ruling, they did say it applied to everything that you made flour from. They just didn't have potatoes when they were making this ruling. But we'll come back to Rav Moshe and how he would respond to that response in a moment. The second explanation, the one we saw from the Arbaturim, which is they might get mixed together in the markets. And then a fascinating one. Until last night, I had never heard this explanation before. Again, in the 13th century, so it's clear that this custom was really taking off in the 13th and 14th century. A Rabbeinu Manoach from Provence said that one of the major kinds of kitniot that people had access to, I'm pausing for a moment just because I'm letting a few more people admitting them into the class. This Rabbeinu Manoach said that one of the main types of kitniot was actually lentils. And if you look in the Torah, both, or in the Talmud in different sources, it identifies lentils. What meal are they typically eaten at? The meal of anybody? Morning at Shiva. They're associated with morning because they're round and they represent the cycle or the circle of life, famous song. And because of their association with that sadness, and Pesach is a chag, which is associated with joy, and everything that we eat and do should bring that joy out. Lentils would be inappropriate. So that explains lentils. It doesn't explain other kitniot, but it's an interesting thought that I had never heard of before. And now that we have this custom starting in the 13th century, you would assume, or not assume, but you might think, fine, so everybody accepted that. And it kind of, it was, even if it was, we're not sure why it started, and initially people rejected it, now it's fine. But then in the 18th century, Rav Yaakov Emden wrote, and he was actually talking about his father, and he says, and I bear witness that my friend, this is in his work, Mor Uketzia, and I bear witness that my father and teacher of righteous, blessed memory suffered much agony over this, talking about kitniot. Every Pesach, he would rage and say, if I had the power, I would cancel this awful custom, talking about not eating kitniot, which is a stringency that causes unintended leniency and from which comes catastrophe and impediments with respect to the prohibition of outright leaven. So we don't have to go into all of his little arguments, but he and his father, and Rabbi Yaakov Emden is incredibly important in the development of halakha. So why he wasn't able to wipe it out then, this shows you the power of custom versus the will of the rabbis and what's written in the books. And rabbis, we deal with this every day. It doesn't matter what we think is right, it matters what people do. It can only be swayed so much. And where we're left with today is Ashkenazi Jews don't eat kitniot. However, the definition of kitniot is not so black and white. So things like chickpeas and hummus and corn and rice really fit into that category, like that's explicitly stated. But what about things that one can make bread from and one can make flour from, but they're not explicitly written? And the examples are peanuts and quinoa. And peanuts, Rav Moshe Feinstein says, the kitniot custom doesn't really have a leg to stand on. He explains it, and he gives a good explanation for it, but he says really like, it's not about it's not fundamentally an issue. It's not going to cause us to eat chametz. It's not eating chametz, but it's a custom that we have accepted and we should respect that. The minhag avotenu, the customs of our ancestors, but it's a custom that doesn't really have a strong definition. So therefore, let's stop expanding it. Anything that's not part of the original custom, please don't add to the list. And that's what happened with peanuts. That's the question that Rav Moshe Feinstein was discussing. And he said, let's not add it to the list. And people have gone back and forth. So today the custom is, for Ashkenazi Jews, generally they don't eat straight up peanuts, certainly not peanut flour. The debate is peanut oil, because it's so removed from peanuts. You can't make flour from it. You can't make bread from it. So the OU and other organizations have gone back and forth. I think as of now, I think the OU says we're not allowing it. But this is getting into that category of policy, custom, and politics more than what's technically permitted, which we'll talk more about in some of the later questions. And the other thing that fortunately has not joined kitniot is quinoa. At least the Orthodox Union officially says that their quinoa, which is checked to make sure no other crops are mixed in with it from their fields, quinoa is totally fine. But that wasn't like it forever. There were a number of years not long ago where quinoa was not cool, and now Baruch Hashem, it's cool. So for years, people were struggling with not getting enough, healthy this in their diet for Pesach, but with quinoa, we're good. And not everyone permits it. But if you ask them why, they would say, I don't know what they would say. They wouldn't necessarily have a really good answer for it. They would say, oh, maybe the crops get mixed in. And our response could be, well, then make sure the crops don't get mixed in or check them. So that is the deal with kitniot. So any questions?
Rabbi.
Yeah.
Rabbi.
Yeah.
Does that mean during Pesach people can cook things in peanut oil?
So that's what I was saying is it's technically, according to Rav Moshe, the answer should be yes. However, generally people are going to hold by the kashrut industry organizations like Orthodox Union, CRC, Chicago Rabbinical Council. So I would have to check, but I believe as of most recently, the Orthodox Union, which I generally hold by, is not allowing for peanut oil. So good.
Then I don't have to worry about that.
No.
But
here's the crazy thing, Rifki. Come to me again in 2 years and say, Rabbi, is peanut oil okay? And it might be. And a lot of these things change because unless there's if the Torah makes it pretty clear that eating a horse is not kosher. So that's not really going to change except for life and death situation. But a lot of these things that are based on unclear customs will change as new foods, new manufacturing processes are introduced. So ask me again in 2 years and I'll give you probably a different answer. Good. So if there are no other questions on that, move on to the next one. So this is a great, so this question can be massive, but I'll try and keep it bekitsur, rather brief and short. And one of the things that confuses people every year is if they go to a kosher market, like Hungarian in Chicago, or the section in Jolasco, or here at Metro Market in Mequon, or wherever, go to the kosher Pesach section. You look for the special symbol that it's kosher for Pesach, OUP, which means Pesach, not Parav. And they say, fine, that's kosher for Pesach. But then they say, do I need kosher for Pesach for everything? So for a carrot, no. For a bottle of pure water, no. For dishwashing soap, even though there's some people who hold that dishwashing soap need it because it comes into contact with your dishes, no, because it's not food. And I'm confident in saying that. Tin foil, maybe 50, 60, 70 years ago was made with lard or something. It's not. So tin foil does not need, plates don't need it, etc. Things that are not food don't need this special symbol. But there are also a bunch of other foods like extra virgin olive oil that don't need a special Pesach symbol. Mm-hmm. And the question is, why? Why is it that some foods need to specifically be made for Pesach and other ones like raisins with an OU on them, and I think a star K as well, but definitely an OU, don't also need a special Pesach thing, just plain raisins with an OU. Why is that? And the answer to that is much more to do with kashrut in general. And it's not about the food itself necessarily. It's about two things. One is where it's made, and if it comes into contact on a conveyor belt with chametz. So that's a simple answer. If a food is made in a factory where it might or certainly comes into contact with hot conveyor belts that come into contact with, even if it's kosher, other products that have chametz in them. If I have, some sort of snack food that would be kosher for Pesach, there's no issue with what's in it, but it's on the same conveyor belt as kosher cookies that are clearly chametz, 100% kosher and parav, but chametz, that might be an issue. So I need to have it on a either koshered conveyor belt or a separate factory. So that's one big simple issue. But the other issue is preservatives. So I'll give you a good example. So the reigning custom is that raw nuts, like just regular nuts that have nothing in them, certainly in the shell, but raw nuts, sliced, I think typically they'll say have an OU or something on there, but they don't need special Pesach certification unless they have preservatives. And some of the letters you might see BHA, BHT, and the reason is those may be made not necessarily from chametz, but from kitniot. So this shows you how powerful kitniot is. Kitniot turned into some chemical substance that we couldn't identify. I don't know what those letters I said stand for, could look it up easily, but turned into another chemical that is used just on the outer part of the food. It's not important for the taste. You don't care if it's there, but it's a preservative, so it's essential. You want it, the food not to go bad. In that case, it would make it not kosher for Pesach. So the foods that do not need a special Pesach certification are made in factories that all year round never come into contact with any form of kitniot or chametz. So water, the way water is bottled, from my understanding, it will never come into contact with any kind of process where chametz or kitniot would meet it. And so too, a product needs to be, make sure that the product doesn't have any of those preservatives. And one other just interesting thing, just because it confuses people, some very common products that tend to be kosher for Pesach all year round, a lot of cheeses, particularly challah Yisrael, like very, cheeses that were made by a Jew or with the Jew involved in the process. Cheeses tend to be kosher for Pesach all year long. It's just easier to make, maybe it's just easier to make them that way all year round. But they often have this line on it that really confuses people. It says, kosher for Pesach or Passover and acceptable for all year use. Because I suppose that someone once thought that something that's kosher for Pesach is not kosher for the rest of the year. I don't know if that's true, but if you think about it for a second, you realize how ridiculous it is. There is nothing that is kosher for Pesach that is not kosher for the rest of the year. It doesn't go, it only goes the other way. So don't get confused by that. So any questions on that? And I think I'll do another class if I don't have it scheduled just on the kashrut industry in general, which is very tricky. A lot is policy and standards, but there's so much more there.
Lots of
It's very
politics.
interesting. Hello, can you hear me?
Oh, Rhoda, yes, I can hear
Hi.
you. Welcome.
I had a trouble. I couldn't find the information better to get out. But anyways, it's interesting. There are some products that made in Israel. I noticed, I've forgotten which, maybe something with vinegar, for kosher for Pesach. And they said, it's okay, kosher, but not for Pesach, but it doesn't include Pesach. But it has an OU on it, so I found out that it's okay.
It is kosher for Pesach, you're saying?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, so that's what I'm saying is there's plenty of products that don't list Pesach specifically, but because of where they're made, how they're made, and what they're made with, there's no issue whatsoever. Strictly, I mentioned extra virgin olive oil. That doesn't actually need a hechsher at all, ever, because of the standards by it. And so too, again, with water. But for Pesach, generally we're more careful, but there are plenty of lists. And I might put this on the Facebook page after we're done. I am going to put a few links to some of the resources I'll mention, like that Rabbi Eliezer Melamed, his book on koshering your kitchen, and Pesach in general. It's all online in translation and in Hebrew, amazing. And lists of what foods don't need a hechsher at all. These are incredible resources. So let's move on to the next section. This one, again, is a very short question. Someone asked me if they have a product that is explicitly kosher for Pesach. Let's say it's cottage cheese and it's listed kosher for Pesach, and they bought it the week before and they got really peckish and they just opened it up, took a plastic spoon, scooped out one spoonful of it, and then closed it up and stuck it back in their fridge and didn't touch it. And then Pesach comes around and they say, uh-oh, I both opened this and ate a spoon. I used a plastic brand new spoon that hadn't touched anything right out of the package. Can I use this on Pesach? And this is an interesting answer because strictly speaking, as long as something has not come into contact with chametz, and one can be sure of that, there's no issue. And a good practical example of this, there are certain products like salt, maybe sugar, that people are honey. Honey's a good one because honey never goes bad. I opened it on Pesach last year, 57.79. It's my kosher for Pesach honey. And by the way, honey does need a special symbol because a honey can be listed with a regular symbol of OU whatever, but they're allowed to not mention that there's a small percentage of corn syrup in it. So you have to get the kosher for Pesach one to make sure there's no kitniot corn syrup. But last year, I opened my honey, and then I put it away with my Pesach stuff, and I open it this year on Pesach. Well, it was opened during the entire year, but it was in a sealed container in my basement in a box. There was zero chance of any, any amount of chametz coming into contact with it. So strictly speaking, that should apply to any product that we can guarantee, even if it was opened a week or a day before Pesach, that it didn't come into contact with chametz. The general suggested practice is not to. So if one opens butter or cheese or milk or something like that, the general practice is to not do it. But if someone says, Rabbi, is it actually forbidden? The answer is no. Rabbi, I know for 100% fact, I know 100% for sure, mea achuz, that this came into no contact with chametz. Is it technically permitted? The answer is, of course, yes. Rabbi, do you suggest doing this? No, I don't suggest doing it because something may accidentally happen. You stick it in the back of your fridge when you're opening up, your flour explodes, whatever. It's not good practice. But strictly speaking, it could be permitted. It's just generally suggested not to do so. And that's an important distinction in kashrut, where we say what's technically permitted and then what is the common practice to help protect us from messing up. So any questions on that?
No.
Right. So this next question here that a lot of people have been fascinated about, and if you haven't heard it after this session, I'll try and post a link, Google this. So in Israel, there were a group of Sephardic rabbis, Edot HaMizrach. I don't know a lot about these rabbis, but I'm sure they're brilliant and could, out-Torah me, under the table. But a number of them came out with a public statement, a heter, a permission, that for families, because of coronavirus, is the background to this, families with older family members, like much, much older, often living on their own, like a grandfather who was really stuck inside, and without being able to come to his children or grandchildren's Seder, Pesach more or less won't exist for them. And the question was, in that exceptional case, which is sadly very common right now, not just in Israel, but the world over, can a computer be set up before Yom Tov, put in the corner, maybe the keyboard covered, maybe the computer is set on a timer so it turns off after the Seder, but set up before Yom Tov so that the grandparents can listen into the Seder. Now, I didn't see whether it talked about whether the grandparent can participate, but presumably if the microphone is open, they could hear, it should be able to go both ways. And these rabbis ruled that it was permitted. And there's two parts to my response here. One is the halachic basis for it, and the other one is the policy response to it, and I'll comment on both. So the first one, or I'll actually give you a short answer. Is there a way that this could be done in a permitted way within Jewish law? And the answer is yes. And there's a number of reasons for that. One is how we understand electricity. And while there are absolutely opinions by very important rabbis that say electricity is forbidden by the Torah, the general consensus, and I'm going by Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, may his memory be for a blessing, went through all of the issues of electricity and said that ultimately none of them were connected with the forbidden melachot, forbidden work on Shabbat. So it falls into a different category, whether certainly it's rabbinic. It's not forbidden by the Torah, forbidden by the rabbis, and it's based a lot on custom and protecting the sanctity of Shabbat. However, because it's rabbinic and not forbidden by God's Torah, even though it's part of Jewish law, and I don't want to diminish that we don't use, or that the accepted halacha, Jewish law, is to not activate electricity on Shabbat, but because it's rabbinic, there's more room for leniency A. So one of the issues, so all of the issues here are in a slightly lower level of forbiddenness, isser, as it were. So a couple issues that might come up. One is having some item that causes sound on Shabbat, like activate sound, not like me talking, but like an instrument or a washing machine or a radio. And that's a real issue. However, in this case, there are explicit permissions for things like a Shabbat alarm. That's pretty much standard. One that you can't activate, it goes on for 30 seconds, turns off. And part of that is because there's a real need for it. And that's kind of the underlying thing here. If someone says, Rabbi, can I just leave my TV on so I can watch the game? I'll probably say, there's room for a discussion, but I would say no, because there's no need for doing that. There's a real need here. Another thing that would come up is there's this Yom Tov Shabbat spirit. it's not in the spirit of Shabbat to be having, electricity used. And again, the response here would be there's an absolute need for it. And why do they have the laptop on? They're not doing it to ruin Shabbos and Yom Tov. They're doing it to create Yom Tov, to be able to fulfill the Pesach Seder. There's another category of not doing things that have like a weekday quality. Not just like going to work, but like playing on computers and stuff like that, using phones, etc. But again, here that category can be a catch-all, very, very wide. But it's easy to narrow it again because of the great need here, and also to set up the laptop in a way that it's very clear that it's being done in a Shabbat way, whether it's covered in some way, put in a part of the room, etc. A real concern is the fear that if there's an issue with the connection, it hangs up or something like that, or the grandparent says, I moved the window around, how do I get back to it? That people will activate, and that is a real concern there. A valid one, but there are plenty of ways to get around it. One is there are ways to deactivate the keyboard, to cover it up so that one can't do it. And in fact, something that's very important is there's an organization in Israel, an acronym, Rashi Tevot, for it is Somet. And Somet is one of the most incredible organizations in the world, but they deal a lot with technology and Jewish law, particularly with medical halakha. So if somebody needs a wheelchair that can somehow be used on Shabbat, they'll figure out a way to do it so it won't explicitly break Shabbat because there's a need. They also have this thing called Somet microphones, which are these microphones that are used for big speeches on Shabbat. And it's actually pretty common in Israel. In America, there's a lot of pushback. And again, this is where policy and politics comes into it. But in Israel, it's not universally accepted, but it has more exceptions. So regular shul service, shacharit, they don't use a microphone. But then they go in their social hall and they have these special microphones set up. So how do they work? They're set up before Shabbat. They're always on. So some microphones, every time I talk, it activates something. And when I'm quiet, it turns something off. These microphones are always on. They're constantly picking up everything. And there's no buttons on the microphones themselves. You can't flick it on and off. And the volume controls have to be in a room somewhere else behind a locked door that you need, two people to unlock it. So I was once at a shul where they had these microphones and they did it all. And to be able to adjust the volume, you literally had to go through like 3 locked doors to get the key to get to the room. But at that point, people wouldn't care anymore about hearing it. So the point there is a way to set up, an accepted way to set up certain electronic devices before Shabbat because of a great need. And while it does not have universal acceptance, there are plenty of heavy hitters that I would also stand behind saying that I personally will say Somet microphones are mutar. And anyone can challenge me, but I'm happy to send out the true vote that permit them. But the final concern is that if the rabbis permit it this year on Pesach, that then people will say, oh, it's okay to do it every single year. And I was actually talking to one of my colleagues who's actually in a conservative shul where they have more flexibility with some of those. Not that they don't respect halakha, but they're more flexibility. But my friend said that their concern is not that the people who are, care more about, the halachic process next year, they'll say, oh, we did it last year, let's do it again. It's the people who never go to Seders, the people who wouldn't be involved anyways. Now they're saying, ooh, you did a Zoom Seder this year. I never been to a Seder before, but keep doing a Zoom Seder. I want you to keep doing it. Why aren't you doing it this year? It was okay last year. Why isn't it okay now, Rabbi? Where everyone else wants to go back to the traditional way. So it is a legitimate concern, but there are plenty of rulings that have been made throughout Jewish history that were for, in Hebrew, they say, sha'at hadacha, for a pressing time. There was an emergency, and this is life or death, the coronavirus. Even though it may not be life or death for someone to be part of a Seder, it's so emotionally, spiritually important for someone to be here that to rely on this for this 1 year and to say that's legitimate, it's not a crazy idea. So I don't think there's any knockout punch, KO, to say that these rabbis are totally wrong. Now, does that mean I'm giving my personal stamp of approval saying, go for it? No. And that'll come up again when I talk here about the responses to it. But I do want to say there's room for conversation, and I respect the ruling of these rabbis. Not everyone does. There were 3 responses to it. The first response from a prominent Israeli rabbi was that these rabbis, the Sephardic ones, they don't know how to give Pesach. It's ridiculous. And, some other choice words that he used. First of all, I think that's harmful. That is sinat chinam. There's absolutely a way to disagree and say, I don't disagree with this ruling. I'm concerned that it will lead to other leniencies, and I would suggest people not follow it. That's a very respectful and clear way, and you can quote that in the media. It's a media-savvy response. But to say these rabbis are fools, they don't know what they're doing, it's incorrect, and it's nasty, and it serves nothing. And the rabbis who say that, I guarantee that they're nasty in other ways. Doesn't mean they're necessarily bad people, but politically, they often say nasty things to stop those they disagree with. There's no value in that response. So anyone who says this is disgusting, it's a perversion of Jewish law, if you push them on it, first of all, they'd probably say, no, I know there's some room for it. They're clearly just trying to stir up the waters, and it's wrong. Doesn't mean they're not allowed to disagree with it, but how they're doing it. The second response that I actually probably connect with more is, I'm not sure I agree with it. I see where it's coming from, but it should be on a more case-by-case basis. Now, one of the reasons they may not have done that is we're not talking about 2 or 3 families in this exceptional situation. We're talking about tens of thousands, if not more. So I understand that. However, ultimately, a lot of lenient opinions like this would be better done in smaller numbers, but I fully recognize where that wouldn't necessarily work here. And the third response, which I respect as well, is a response from a rabbi in Israel who also says, how brave of these rabbis. It takes a lot of chutzpah and confidence to be able to put out a ruling that, again, is based on strong sources, is, even if not everyone agrees, it is a valid opinion. And for them to say it publicly, I commend them for that. And I do. Whether or not I fully agree with them, good for them. And we need more rabbis like that. However, because of the negative response, some of those rabbis quickly backed down. And this is a game in Israel that we can talk about in further classes. However, the opinion is put out there. So for people who say, Rabbi Dinin, can I hold on this? My response would be, let's talk about it. Let's talk about what your situation is, what you're doing. But once 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 14 brave rabbis put an opinion out into the world with sources, and they have authority. Some of these rabbis were the head of, Batei Din, of rabbinic courts. It's really hard to put the cat back in the bag. And I'm not saying that the future of Pesach, God willing, when this is all over, should be Zoom seders, but it's important that in times like these, rabbis show confidence and bravery when it's needed, and are not always just strict for the sake of being strict. So any questions after that? Excellent. So the final topic that I want to discuss, which I think will be relevant to a lot of people who are hearing this either on Facebook or hear it when it's recorded, is what does someone do who's living completely on their own and they've never done a Seder in their life, and they may not even have the resources for it, and there's a few responses there. So the first response to they may not have the resources is, particularly here in Milwaukee, and I'm sure there are other communities, or I hope there are other communities doing this as well. Our Jewish community came together, and there are 500 Seder meals with matzah, grape juice, chicken, gefilte fish, I think charoset, maror, all the fixings for a full meal. And for free of charge, people can sign others up for this. I've identified a few people and signed them up. Or anyone listening to this who says, I need that meal. I can't, it's not safe for me to go out. I don't know where to get a meal. Talk to me and I'll try and set you up with it, and it'll be delivered to your home. So in terms of just getting the basic fixing, that's one option. In terms of what one absolutely needs, there's actually a mitzvah or a halakha called ma'od chitim, flour money. And it's the practice of making sure that every member of one's community is able to hold a Seder. So they put in money to buy matzah and wine or grape juice. And I've done that for a number of my congregants, and those, again, who are not able to, reach out to me and we can set you up. But a Seder really needs those things. And then ideally a Haggadah, so one knows what to do. But then the question is, fine, I got my grape juice, I got my matzah. I said Borei Pri Hagafen 4 times, throughout the Seder, and I said, Al achilat matzah and hamotzi, and I ate my matzah, and I was even lucky enough to get some maror, some, lettuce or horseradish, whatever you use. What about the rest of the Seder? I've been to a Seder before. It's 4 hours long. I'm living alone in my apartment. I can't do a 4-hour Seder, even with the book in my hand. So what do I need to do? And to answer, there's 2 ways to answer that. One is to look back at Rambam, Maimonides, and his Sefer HaMitzvot. He wrote this incredible book where he went through every mitzvah from the Torah. And it's actually a whole kind of literature where different rabbis wrote different lists. They disagree with each other. But generally, they're all going to agree that on Pesach, there are a few mitzvot that are sacrosanct. One is don't eat chametz, and its inverse is do eat matzah at the Sedarim at the very least. And at the Seder, the rabbis say one must have 4 cups of wine. But what about all the stuff in between? And Rambam in his Sefer HaMitzvot, his 157th mitzvah in his list, we are commanded to tell the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim, tell about the Exodus from Egypt on the beginning of the night in the 15th of Nisan with all the eloquence at our command. So the basic mitzvah is to tell the story of Pesach, but ideally one would tell it in this beautiful way, which again would go on for pages and pages. And he says, Hareze Meshubach, whoever does, if you've ever been to a Seder before, where you have that guy, and I'm pointing at myself right now, who asks a question on everything, has a Devar Torah for every single sentence, and it goes till 3, 4, 5 in the morning. And in fact, I did one in Israel. It was amazing with Rabbi Landis, and we went until Shachari and then davened in his home. It was amazing, literally the entire night. And I think only one person fell asleep. But not everyone can do that. So ideally, one should do a beautiful long Seder with lots of discussion. Well, who are you going to discuss with if you're all alone? So there's so the basic mitzvah is to tell the story. And in fact, the rabbis do say if somebody's alone, even a scholar who's alone, who knows everything, does he need to be asking themselves these rhetorical education questions like the Haggadah? And they say, yes, there's a value in just asking the questions, even if no one's listening. It's important to do it anyways. So there's a rabbi in California, Rabbi Bookstein, I believe, from the Pico Shul. And he put out this 10-minute Seder. Now, he's not doing it to diminish the Seder. He's doing it for people who aren't sure what they're doing and aren't able to do a full long one. I'm going to post that source again on Facebook and send it out to my community. And my suggestion is to print out that guide and to have it with an English or Hebrew Haggadah, which I will also put an actual Haggadah that you can print online. There's some beautiful ones online that you can print out. And if you're not able to print, you can contact me. I can try and get a Haggadah to your house, at least for my local East Side Milwaukee community. But the way he put his list together is to put the essential things. So the cups, the maror, the bitter herb, the matzah, and the story. And again, the story can be as long or as short as one if it's just manishtana halayla hazeh, and then doing a few basic sections that he explicitly says, avadim hayinu hayinu, that short paragraph, we were slaves. Do that. And if you go by his guide, a person will skip a lot. And again, if they can, one should. But if they're not able to, it's okay. And the other essential thing besides the story and the foods is the halal, praise. Because part of us telling the story is to remind us of why we are here today, why we accepted the covenant with Hashem and Hashem's Torah is because Hashem literally saved our entire people from slavery and destruction. And to show our gratitude, we have this whole Seder, and the Hallel, which literally means praise, is a series of Tehillim compiled by David HaMelech, King David. And there's a number of them we say before the meal, and a number we say after the meal. And that is essential. Again, and by the way, all of this can be done in English. While it's beautiful and certainly ideal for one to say it in Hebrew, everything is totally kosher, including the blessings, everything, if it is said in English. So if one has a Haggadah and they just read through it in English with this 10-minute guide, they have fulfilled their obligation, just eat a lot of matzah and you're sure you get it. So this year is not just an opportunity for people who have never done a Seder to be flexible and to really work with people and what they're able to do, but it also allows us to better understand what are the core components and mitzvot of the Torah. anytime someone needs to be lenient, it requires them to have a much, much better and stronger understanding of Jewish law and all of its customs. So I will put those sources out there. And again, for someone who's not able to do the full Seder, there are resources and there are sections that can be glossed or skipped over. And again, ideally one should do them all, but one does not have to if they're not able. So any questions on that, on the mini Seder?
Everything's cool.
Great. So we're actually just about near the end. So I'm gonna open it now. If there are any immediate questions, and if I know the answer, of course, I'll answer now. If not, I can post them online. And anyone who's listening here on Facebook Live, if you have questions, whether they're very specific about kashrut or about the Seder, or anything, whether it has to do with the novel coronavirus and how that may influence things, or just in general, please post and I'll point you in the right direction. So any other questions?
Okay, I have a question.
Yeah,
about before on Erev Yontif, the Bechorim, I can't think of the first word.
The Ta'anit Bechorot, you're talking about the fast of the first one?
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about, yeah.
Yes. So you're just talking about what to do this year because we can't congregate together.
Yeah.
So
Your first one.
yeah, so a little bit of background is before or say on Pesach, the 10th and final plague was the death of the firstborn. Now, strictly speaking, that applied to all firstborn, Jews and non-Jews alike, or not Jews, but Israelites, so more general, our tribe. We were saved, and the Egyptians were not. And because of the firstborn Israelites being saved, they owed a debt to Hashem. And the way that was intended, clearly from the Torah, to be paid is the people who were supposed to serve in the Mishkan, the tabernacle, and ultimately the Beit HaMikdash, were not the tribe of Levi and the Kohanim, the priests. They were supposed to be firstborn males. So any firstborn males watching this, you were supposed to be a priest and get the first aliyah being called up for the Torah. However, anyone listening to the call, why did the firstborns lose that right? What did they do? Sin of the golden calf, Egel HaZahav. So after that incredibly traumatic experience where the people, created the golden calf, regardless of why they were doing it and if they were trying to connect to God in a different way, they broke God's law. The punishment is the firstborns were not allowed to serve in the temple, and the one tribe that did not participate, other than Aharon himself, sidebar, were the tribe of Levi. And they were the ones who went around and they punished the people and killed their fellow brothers, but they were rewarded with the priesthood. However, to mark that moment historically, on Erev Pesach, all firstborns, as a way to mark that history and perhaps say thank you to God, there's a fast just for firstborn males, and some, I believe some might say firstborn women as well, but specifically for men. Now, the fast itself, as with a number of other fasts, not including, there are certain fasts that are minor fasts, and they can be broken by something called a siyum. A siyum literally means to complete something. And if somebody is studying something, a major work of Jewish, literature, when they finish it, they celebrate, 7.5 years finishing the study of Talmud. They just had a huge siyum on that I was part of, which I was very excited about. And one of the ways to celebrate that is to have a meal that has sort of this mitzvah element to it. And the element of that meal is so joyous that specifically for the fast of the firstborns, actually I don't believe it works for any other fast. It does work during the 9 days or the 3 weeks before Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, where the custom is to not eat meat. But at a siyum meal done during those days, one can eat meat. And the fast of the firstborn, one can eat if they join in that meal. So what usually happens is people come to the shul. I did this last year. Actually, it wasn't me. It was 2 of my congregants. They finished learning a whole tractate, a Masechet of Gemara. They shared with us the last little bit of learning, and then we all went downstairs and we had breakfast together, celebrating their learning. Great. Strictly speaking, it does not need to have a minyan. So even if 6 men specifically showed up, and women as well who came there, that would be enough, because they'd be sharing in the joy. The meal itself would be the person who finished studying, they'd be celebrating and you sharing that joy. But we can't congregate in that way. So the question is, can it be done remotely? Now, I did see a single opinion from a respected rabbi, but it was in a source that was kind of like a comment on an online forum mentioning that this rabbi may have said it somewhere that it might be okay. So I'm not going to hold by that, even if it's valid. But it was clear from many, many other explicit sources that doing it virtually would not work. Why? Because the whole point of the siyum meal is that one shares in the joy of the meal that person is having. I can't share in the joy of a meal if I can't have a meal with a person. And right now, our technology does not allow us to share meals over Zoom and Skype, etc. So unfortunately, at least in my understanding and the way I rolled for my community, and I know others as well, is that, and by the way, there's probably someone who would disagree with me and say, no, it is okay, and I respect that. But my ruling, based on what I've seen, is not to allow that. However, for those who say, Rabbi, this is onerous, I can't study 150 pages of Gemara in the original with the commentaries, anything like that. Fortunately, it has been ruled that studying any book of Tanakh, of the Torah, with a traditional commentary would be permitted for an individual to do, and then to celebrate that. So there are books in the Torah like Esther or Ruth, that are rather beautiful books, but rather short. And if one were to read through the book of Ruth with Rashi's commentary, which you can find online, you could just Google Tanakh Judaica Press, and you'll find the whole thing online. I think on Chabad's website, it's an amazing service that they have online. You can just learn the whole thing in English with Rashi's commentary and finish it within, certainly by next week. Someone suggested, Rabbi, what about the book of Ovadia, which is one chapter? I made a face, I was like, I don't know if that's really long enough, but I said, it's fine. So not everyone can do this, and I recognize that, but hopefully someone who cares about this fast and is able to participate can go online and learn 2 or 3 chapters with Rashi's commentary and translation. And it doesn't mean they have to sit there and break their teeth and pore over it and philosophical things. Read through it, make sure they understand the basic idea, and then on Erev Yom Tov, so next Wednesday, during the morning, read the last couple verses with Rashi in it. And certainly for this year, when we're being flexible, it's fine. Next year, we'll all be together. But that's the advice I would give to people in this situation. Does that help answer your question, Rhoda?
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Great. All right, if there are no other questions, then I think we'll end for this evening. Thank you all so much. And again, for those who are either listening on Zoom, following along on Facebook, if you have any comments or questions, please share. And I'm also going to send to my community and list on Facebook the resources that I shared. And it's very, very important this year, not only that we all connect to each other as much as possible, certainly before Yom Tov, for those who are not going to do some kind of Zoom Seder, but for us to ask questions, because the more we understand Jewish law, and it's not that it leads to leniencies, but the more we appreciate it, and the more that we can work with it, and it won't seem onerous. And Jewish law will always seem onerous and too much to deal with when we don't understand it. So keep asking questions, and wherever you are this Pesach, even though it's going to be a challenge, we should use the beautiful imagery of the Pesach experience itself, from our ancestors coming out of slavery, and what they had to go through, but there was a light at the end of the tunnel. And please God, for our whole community, there is a light at the end of this tunnel, and together, even virtually, we can get through this stronger, please God, stronger than we were before. With that, I wish everyone a wonderful evening and a Chag Kasher v'Sameach. Be well.
Thank you.
Thank you, the same to you.
Thank you, Rabbi.